After a long fought, violent battle for peace and democracy and equality in South Africa, a multi-party negotiation was established in 1990. We call it Codesa, and Codesa stands for the Convention for a Democratic South Africa. What Codesa was a large group of people representing a large group of interests, although not democratically elected, came together to decide what South Africa would be. Now, this came down to questions about what sort of governance system we would have. As I've said before, we had a parliamentary supremacy in the past. This clearly did not work. And so it was decided that we would have a constitutional democracy, a representative constitutional democracy. So what was decided at Codesa was that in the context of South Africa, with vast inequalities along socioeconomic and racial lines, that a representative constitutional democracy would be the right idea. Representative constitutional democracy means that we, as ordinary citizens, vote for representatives along party lines, that we would like to be our voice in the legislative and executive processes to decide how the country is run. We make those decisions based on the policies that each party puts out. We call these their manifestos. And on the basis of the party's manifesto, we decide who resonates best with us as individual voters. The majority then gets elected, creates laws that are consistent with a constitution, and executes those laws in terms of the executive in a manner that is consistent with the constitution. So the real question there was, what will the constitution say? The constitution, it was decided, would recognize the UN's Universal Declaration of Human Rights, that all people are created equal, that we all have freedom of association, freedom of religion, freedom of conscience and political thought, the right to protest, the right to display our dissatisfaction with the government, and the right to vote. The deliberations at Codesa, and specifically Codesa 2, went deeper into discussing what it would mean to have customary law as well as common law in South Africa, recognizing that around 30% of South Africans live in a customary law setting. So to disregard customary law would be very damaging to the right, specifically the right to self-determination, that South Africans should be able to enjoy in terms of a constitutional democracy. The pillars that we can see in our constitution come from the preamble, that South Africa is a non-racial, non-sexist land based on an open and democratic society. We recognize the importance of dignity as not only a right, but an underlying principle that can be imbued in all rights. So what Codesa did in a space that was extremely violent, that was extremely fraught, where South Africa between 1991 and 1993 experienced massacres and bombings and just really awful violence, is they managed to create a constitution with a constitutional project which is prospective, which is forward-looking, to create a country that would be equal, that would strive for better equality. And one of the ways that they did that was by the introduction of socioeconomic rights, these third-generation rights, these rights that ensure the state has an obligation to provide. This we hadn't had before. The state may have provided things like education, like healthcare, but we didn't have a right, we didn't have an actionable way of challenging the state to provide these things. The Constitution is also, in that way, the instruction manual for the state on what they should be doing and how they should be doing it. So what we ended up with was this truly remarkable space of creating a project, creating an instruction manual for the state to follow on. There've been a lot of contentious views about Codesa being a sellout space or a space where what people wanted wasn't given. But in fact, if you give it context and content and the result, the context being the Codesa coming together to try and avoid a violent revolution where lives would be lost for no reason, and the content being this project, this instruction manual to make a consistently better state year on year because of the checks and balances that the Constitution creates. I think that's truly remarkable and something as South Africans we can be incredibly proud of. So I want to talk just a moment about checks and balances because this is something that will also underpin how to litigate on constitutional issues. The Constitution itself creates checks and balances. The executive watches out for the legislature to ensure that laws that are passed will pass constitutional scrutiny. We've got the legislature keeping the executive in check because they have the ability to vote, to pass a vote of no confidence. We've got the judiciary that ensures that all conduct by the executive and the legislature passes that constitutional scrutiny, is constitutional. And remember that the Constitution says that any conduct or law that is found to be invalid must be struck. So our checks and balances also forms a cornerstone of how we think about litigating on constitutional issues. We'll expand on that in a little bit more detail later on.